Hey, and welcome to Matt and Jess TV. I am Matt Roast here with Jessica Bun Bun. This is our reaction and review for Interview with the Vampire Season 2, Episode 2. Who all was ready for the Theater de Vampires? I was so excited to get to this point. This is what I've been waiting for. This was what was promised in the previews for this season. Like I've said in the past, I'm not a book reader. I'm not familiar
No.
with the Anne Rice material as a lot of you guys are. By the way, we don't want spoilers. If you know what's coming up in the story, don't let us know. We like the thrill of the surprise.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, we don't know much of anything that's coming up. I read Interview with the Vampire a million years ago. I barely remember what happened in the
Hmm.
book. I just remember that I liked it and I saw the movie a million years ago as well. But yeah, no spoilers if you guys have read the books for the people out here who are just, watching the show and
Yeah.
figuring it out.
Like to me, the biggest takeaway of this particular episode is the idea of joy. And
Yes.
what does joy look like for a vampire? Because we're coming off of the premiere, which, while good, was also very bleak. And it's not an episode that I'm just eager to jump right back into immediately because it's just these characters are so sad and so struggling. And it's just like, okay, Claudia, at the very least in this episode, she finds a place where she feels like she belongs. She sees other vampires and they're enthusiastic and they're different. And there's like some of that childlike wonder is back.
Her face at that theater was everything. She was so involved in it. I mean, they brought together that play and the skits. Like, it was funny, it was tantalizing, it was macabre. Like, it was everything that I had hoped that it would be. And clearly, it was everything that Claudia hoped it would be. By the end of this episode, she was just in vampire heaven. She had found her people, she was ready to roll with them forever.
And as for Louis, you have Armand, but otherwise, it's a little bit of a different story.
Yeah, it was a very interesting journey that he went on as well. And we'll get more into all of that. But before we do, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It is the best way to help us here at the channel, help support us here. It really means a lot to us. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed.
Also, if you want to support us further, be sure to join our Patreon. We have a link right in the description below for that. We have all sorts of exclusive video content over there. We want you guys to check that out. And we are so grateful to those of you who have.
Okay, let's talk about my man Louis, who I watched the show for. I
Yeah.
absolutely love his character. He went on a journey in this episode. We saw in the beginning, in the premiere, where Louis and Claudia finally found their footing with each other, where he had looked at her and was like, listen, if you were the last vampire on earth, I'd be happy with that. Like, you're all I
Mhm.
care about. And in this episode, we saw them in Paris, where she was still kind of trying to find her footing. But man, he had found his footing. He was just like, this is the place. I'm taking pictures.
Yeah.
I'm feeling good. I'm here with Claudia. Our relationship is better. And they had this very honest conversation about who they are and what they want as individuals, where Claudia kind of laid it out and was just like, okay, like, I know you're here for me and I'm here for you, and that's great, but who is Louis? What do you want for yourself outside of this? Like, as yourself? Like, are you someone who's just gonna be taking pictures, or is there something deeper that you want? Do you want other connections? Like, you need to really figure out who you are and where you fit in. And a part of this for Claudia is talking about herself too. She's trying to figure out where she fits in, where we see at the end of the episode she's driving off in this motorcycle being like, this is it, this is life, this is everything. And she really wanted to figure out where she fit in, where by the end of this episode, Louis kind of like, I don't know. This theater was weird. Like, I just don't fit in exactly here.
There's always a lot to unpack with Louis. I think a good starting off point here for me is just this idea of how lost he still is.
Mhm.
Like, this is a really relatable trait. Like, I've been like this, and I
Mhm.
know a lot of people have, where you
Yes.
just sort of constantly feel like, oh, a part of me relates to this group. Like, there's all these other vampires. Shouldn't I relate to them? But there's still something missing, and that's something that he's still struggling to figure out because I think a lot of
Mhm.
his life has been identified with relationships, his
Yep.
relationship with Lestat, his relationship with Claudia, we're soon to be his relationship with Armand. And,
Hmm.
if you separate all those different things from him, what is he? And I think that's still something he's struggling a lot with. I think it's going to be a struggle the entirety of the season without even knowing where the story goes. And with the theater, let's just ask this question collectively, and I'll ask this of you. Would you go to see a show at the Theater de Vampires? Because I'm going to give you a pretty clear answer for me. And
100%. I'd be in the front row for that. I love all things vampires. If I didn't know that I was going to go there and be drained of my blood, I would probably go.
in the words of every star of Shark Tank, I'm out. I'm
No,
not going.
I'm anything vampire. Like I just watched, well, not anything. I just watched the first episode of the Netflix Dracula, and I say it like this because they were calling Jonathan Harker Johnny Blue Eyes, and I was
What?
just like, I couldn't get through the first episode. I got near the end, and I was like, and I'm so out. But for the most part, yes, vampire theater, I would absolutely be there for it. If it didn't have all the death at the end, I'm here for it. Like I said, it was funny, it was tantalizing, it was macabre. It was so theatrical. I love how they mixed in motion picture with the theater. I loved everything about it. I would be there for that.
Send me the DVD. I would not. I don't want to be there in person, but you send me the DVD.
You're
I'll
not
watch it.
invited.
Well, that's fine. I don't need to be invited. I'll hire somebody to record it, and then I'll watch the DVD later because I get too uncomfortable being around all these other people in this show where I don't know what's going to happen. But no, the entire theater sequence was endlessly entertaining. And yeah, Claudia really found her people. It's understandable why Louis would be uncomfortable with it at the same time. I mean, what is going on at this place is just really crazy.
Yeah, that's the beautiful wholesome thing about Louis is that while he's a vampire, he's not this group of vampires who really have dove into their lifestyle. That's like, this is what we are. This is how we feed. It's this big theatrical experience. And, other vampires want to watch this too and be part of it. And then you have Louis being there like, this is weird. I don't feel this. I'm not here for this. But what became even more interesting was afterwards, where the Covenant invited them into the back, and there was the big question: who is your maker? And you see Claudia's face just like drain for a second there when she sees this picture of Lestat on the wall, and was just like, "Oh, my maker." It's the very real sounding Bruce the Vampire. I was just like, oh, stop. Nobody's believing this. Bruce the Vampire.
Bruce the Vampire sounded like Interview with the Vampire briefly crossed over with What We Do in the Shadows, and it's just somebody that Nandor has brought over to the Vampire Mansion.
Right.
This is my friend Bruce. It does not feel like this show, but that's a part of what does make it fun still, is that they really flesh out these vampires, and there's sort of this theme of vampires are not all the same. It's just like people. People are not all the same. They all
Right.
have their own interests. They all have their own way in which they want to do things. But amidst all this fun and this craziness of the theater, that picture of Lestat is this idea that you can never really escape your past, and it's
Mm-hmm.
so much more difficult when you are a small, tight-knit community. There's
Yep.
not that many of them, and the ones who are there have been around for a very long time. And I can't, this exploring this for Louis now is going to be very interesting because he's got this new life, but he's constantly reminded of his old life in the process.
And also, they killed Lestat.
Yeah.
And, we know from the finale that he's not dead. He was at the dump eating rats, and that's fine. But they think he's dead, that they have killed him. And so going into this group where it's like, oh, here's our founder, Lestat. It's like, uh-oh. Well,
Yeah.
I guess we can't say that because, we're the people who killed him. And if they find that out, they're going to kill us.
Yeah. And this is the problem that I would foresee from all of this, not knowing the books, is just that if Lestat is still alive, and obviously sometime has already passed since season one, if there's a place he's going to go, isn't it going to be a place that he feels accepted, or a place where he knows other people? Like, to me, it's not the craziest idea in the world that eventually Lestat's going to just like stroll on into the theater and be like, hey guys, what did I miss?
Yeah. And it was also, okay, this was like my absolute favorite part of this episode
Okay.
was with Daniel, Armand, and Louis.
Oh,
When
Daniel.
they're finally talking about all of this, where it's just like, Oh my goodness. Okay, so Lestat was here at the theater, and then, he had a relationship with Armand, and now Louis had a relationship with Lestat, and now they have a relationship, and Daniel's just trolling them by playing the Young and the Restless theme song. I was laughing so hard. And then even when they get into the next part of it, where it's like, okay, all right, we get it. It's like a soap opera. You're playing Young and the Restless. We're fine here. Let's move into the next part of it. And Louis trying to explain the next part of it, and they're back in the past again. And he's like, so next we're doing this. And he's, fixing the photos. And he's like, can you turn that off? It was so good. I loved it.
Daniel may be my favorite character on the
What a
show,
troll.
which is odd because I know he's not a vampire and he's not even around in the past, but it's just like, one, he looks and kind of sounds like the late Anthony Bourdain, who I loved, and I don't know why anytime I see him, I'm reminded of him. But beyond all that, he's a very interesting guy. He's really taking this responsibility seriously, but it's pretty risky to be trolling these vampires with the Young and the Restless theme song, given that, you could be dead by them at any moment in time if you make them
Yeah.
mad.
And he's taken so many jabs at Armand that it feels like at some point these two are just going to go outside and have a knife fight.
Yeah.
Like they are just back and forth and back and forth. And Daniel has really been needling him and needling him and needling him, and started really needling Louis as well. Where at one point, Louis is finally just like, oh, you're gonna get into my past and needle me about my past. You're supposed to be the journalist. You're supposed to be unbiased, listening to my story and, recording the details of my life. But instead, you're like coming in and give me your commentary on my life. How about we comment on your life? And starts getting into that. And I was like, good for him for standing up on that.
Yeah, there was a part of me that felt bad for Daniel, but at the same time, Daniel also created the
He
situation
did.
himself, so he put himself there. But it's once again, I just love the idea that Daniel is not a narrative device, and I think it would be so easy on this show
Yeah.
to just make him into that and just make him be like this boilerplate. Okay, tell me your story. But I like that he and Armand do not enjoy each other at all. Like Daniel sees Armand as, I know you don't want Louis to do this interview. I know you're here potentially distorting the story. I think we can treat Louis as a pretty reliable narrator. I think Louis is trying his best, but Armand is just sort of that guy being like, hey, it'd be fun if you weren't as reliable a narrator.
Yeah, Armand has his own agenda, and we know that there have been pages that were removed from Claudia's diary that
Yeah.
have Armand in them. There are certain things that he doesn't want out there, and even when they're talking, I mean, there sounds like there's a certain amount of jealousy as well from Armand about Lestat and Louis' relationship. Like he even said, hey, yeah, they were together for a while, but guess what? I've been with him for 47 years longer than him. So it's me. I was just like, oh, what's going on there with that?
I know I'm going to make a total fool of myself in this moment because I know all of you book readers already have the answer to this. But the thing that I am
Yes,
really,
yes, but
in,
we don't.
the thing I'm in my head a lot about now, I'm just sort of sitting back being like, okay, where's Lestat going to show up? Like I made the joke earlier about him going to the theater, but there's a part of me that would also, and this would inform the character of Daniel even more, even though it would make him pretty evil, is in the event that Daniel is just like, oh yeah, and I have somebody else who's going to join us now as well, and in rolls Lestat, and that's where Lestat is reintroduced, and that he's a part of these interviews now too. But it's Sam Reid, the actor, has been in all these interviews, and yeah, we've seen a little bit of him on the show, but I know in my heart that we are going to see Lestat at some point in one of these timelines again. And I'm just sort of being like, okay, when is it going to be? Is he going to show up at the worst possible time, as it's sort of been alluded to already?
Let's talk about that letter. Speaking about
Hmm.
Lestat and seeing him in this episode reading that letter. Oh
Yeah.
my God. It just broke my heart watching Louis. And it's another just reminder of how good Jacob Anderson is on this show, that as he's reading this letter, he's reminded of what he did to him, and
Hmm.
the love that they did share. And while it wasn't perfect by any means, he did feel this deep love for him. And hearing this letter, he's just being brought back into this idea of how much Lestat loved him.
It is a really complicated sort of love, but I think for Louis, the other thing that makes it so hard even with this interview, he can't really express to anyone else what the love for Lestat meant because nobody else can understand it. And that's what's hard about telling a story like this is that Louis is telling a story to mortals about what it's like to be immortal, what it's like to have
Yeah.
this relationship that never really changes when it comes to age. And so while there are certainly a lot of parts of that relationship that are incredibly unhealthy,
Hmm.
it's also something that's a very unique experience for him, and he can't replace that.
Yeah, because he's also his maker. So
Yeah.
he's also the person who brought him into this vampire world. And he's having to tell the story in front of his current relationship that he's been in with for a very long time. Now, have Armand and Louis had these deeper, honest talks about his relationship with Lestat? I think so. I
Yeah.
think some of it, but I don't know if Louis has told all of it. I'm not sure. Like, it's tough. I mean, let's think to our relationships. How deep do we get in of just how much you loved this other person to the person that you're with, right?
Yeah.
Probably not all that much.
No, it's insanely awkward, but I think this is something that Armand is going to have to contend with, whether it's in the interview, whether it is smaller nuggets that get
Hmm.
explored in the past. But I mean, moving into the rest of the season now, like one of the most curious things that I have in my mind about where it's going is Claudia now has found her people, and
Hmm.
she's found this world that makes a lot of sense to her.
Hmm.
She and Louis have this bond, but is it going to start to be pulled away now to where Louis already lost Lestat for better or for worse? Is he at risk now of losing Claudia? And if that happens, where exactly does that leave him?
And how reckless are these vampires being? Like, is that putting her in danger of getting killed as well? Like, we saw them. I mean, vampires couldn't be more cool, but then you put them on motorcycles,
Okay.
like bombing down the street. I'm just like, oh my God, like they're just dripping with coolness.
Yeah.
That they then all get to this mansion where they go in and just they're killing everybody, they're setting it on fire. It's just like, okay, well, at some point,
Mhm.
they're being reckless. So at some point they could get themselves killed. They just feel like that all-powerful youth, where
Mhm.
you feel like you're immortal, but in this case they are, and they can do anything and get away with anything, but at some point things catch up to you. Yeah, you're a vampire, you're immortal, but you can still die.
Yeah, I wonder if they're just all rolling around with this question of like, oh, what's the worst that can happen to us? We're vampires. People find out, people find us like, but yeah, there's still some really terrible things that can happen to you. And one of the other really bad things about being immortal is if you're locked up and you're trapped somewhere, you're
Mhm.
just going to be locked up and trapped there forever. You're never going to be able to leave. And that's a fate worse than death in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and the thing that I'll say that I also really enjoyed of how they figured out how to keep Louis there, because as he was watching the theater and after the
Mhm.
theater talking to Claude, he was just like, this scene is not for me.
Mhm.
I'm not here with it. I'm not down with it. And she's like, don't ruin this for me. And he's like, okay, no problem, but this isn't for me. That having Armand come in and do the first introduction and bring him to the theater, and then afterwards where they're at this
Mhm.
really macabre scene at this mansion where everybody's dying and they're all feeding, and you're having this more intimate moment outside with Armand and Louis. Armand is the thing that's going to keep Louis there because, as you've said, Louis's biggest love in life is having deeper relationships, which is something that's very human, that all of us feel,
Mhm.
where we do have these deeper connections with other people and they become a part of us and we become a part of them. And that's something that is a big part of Louis's identity. So, him building this relationship and feeling these feelings again that he was starting to feel like maybe he was never going to feel again after Lestat, meeting Armand and being like, oh, wow, I have these butterflies again. Here's somebody who's very, kind to me and handsome and I feel a connection with. And they're building this trust too, where Armand was like, I don't know what's going on with Lestat, but like we said that name, and while Claudia blocked everything out, you didn't. So I don't know what it is, but I'm just gonna tell you, I'm gonna protect you right away.
Yeah.
I'm gonna tell you, you need to block it out, because if the rest of the coven figures out what's going on, and if it's something that's nefarious, they are not gonna forgive you for it. They are not gonna take it well. Right away, there's that connection where he's like, I know something's off,
Mhm.
but you can trust me.
There's that connection and there's tension. And I think that is what makes every relationship interesting is that there's real stakes to the game already for Louis because he has this information that could go very, very badly.
Mhm.
Somebody saying that they might end up protecting him. That's a connection that he can build on really, really fast. I think in general, this episode is much better than the premiere in my mind. I think the premiere was paced a little too slow for my liking. I know there was important stuff in there, but it just felt like everything was firing on all cylinders in this episode. There was fun, there was drama, there was relationships, there was just so much to mine across the board.
Yeah, there's no question that the premiere was slower. I was more of a fan of it than a lot of you guys out there and you as
Mm,
well. I didn't mind the slower pace because I felt like it needed to build that years long loneliness, especially with Louis and Claudia, who weren't really talking and they're the only vampires they know of for 4 years and they're not even talking. I felt like it needed to be there. Yes, it was slower paced and all that, but I liked it. This episode, though, oh my goodness. Yeah, it was firing on all cylinders. I absolutely loved it.
yeah, this was a total blast to watch, and we are so looking forward to the rest of this season already. So hit that subscribe button so you guys don't miss any of the rest of our coverage. Also, be sure to join our Patreon. We have video reviews there of shows that we are not covering anywhere else. Also, live streams that you can talk to us all about Interview with the Vampire. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you here next time.